Hello, everyone. Welcome to my Watson demo. My name is Mitch Mason. I'm the offering manager for the Watson Assistant service. It's a Watson service to help you build your own chatbot or virtual assistant. So I was just going to show a quick demo. This is the standard demo we show, so we kind of know what we're getting into. And then I was just going to build one, maybe in the event of a natural disaster, what people might be doing. So just really quick, in this scenario, Watson's your co-pilot. So you're driving your car, right? What are some things that you might need to do? Maybe it's a rental car, you don't know where the lights are. So rather than fiddling with all the different switches, you can just say, hey, Watson, turn on the lights. And there you go, right? Watson turns the lights on for you. It's raining, obviously, so turn on my wipers. And again, Watson takes action. So you just can kind of speak your commands, Watson take care of it. Both of these are pretty simple scenarios, but in some cases, you might want to do something that takes a couple different messages. So something like turn on the radio. Now, in this case, Watson says, well, I can do that, but I need a little more information, right? So Watson's actually going to ask and clarify, what kind of music did you want? Now, I can just say something like rock. If you think about the word rock just kind of in isolation, is there a rock in the road? Is the rock sitting next to me in my car? No, I meant rock music, right? Watson knows this because of the actual messages before, right? He understands the conversation that you're having and can have a discussion about that and still know and stay on topic. So it's all really easy to configure this, and that's what I was going to show a demo of today. In this case, I was going to use the call for code event to kind of do some things that people might need to do in a natural disaster. So as a government agency or whoever's going to support the natural disaster, a virtual assistant's actually a really interesting idea because they don't want to have to keep people on staff just kind of waiting for natural disasters, right? That could be those people could be very useful doing other things until a natural disaster hits, and then all of a sudden they're going to get a huge number of calls. So having those resources always ready at the right amount without really wasting time is really hard to plan for. So a virtual assistant is a perfect way to really answer the most common questions that people are going to be asking during a natural disaster. It'll be ready and scalable, all the time, just kind of ready to take as many questions as there are at any given time, whether it's 0 or 1,000. The virtual assistant is there ready to do its job. And it's really not going to cost anything to have when it's not being used. And then when it is ready to be used, you're seeing all that value and it's working hard. So this is the Watson Assistant tooling interface. In order to use any of the Watson services, you'll actually start in the IBM Cloud. So this is my dashboard. I have a few different applications. I'm sharing a workspace with my friend Chris. And you'll see I have some Cloud Foundry services. I would go to the catalog, find whatever services are relevant to me. There's a number of Watson services. We'll be talking about Watson Assistant today. So when I click on the service, it'll send me a link to open up the tooling and any information about the documentation, etc. So just for time, I've already opened up the tool for us, and I'm just going to start building something. Now, the way that the demo was working was it's using what are called intents and entities to understand the user's question. The intent is kind of the thing that the user wants to do, right? You saw before I said, turn this on, turn that on, turn on the radio. I was just turning things on. So in order to keep high accuracy, I used one intent actually for all 3 of those commands. Just turn on objects in the car. That way, no matter how I say it or which object I'm talking about, Watson can understand at a more general level, here's what I'm trying to do. It's the intent behind what I'm saying. Then I would use entities to kind of clarify which object I'm talking about. So in the scenario we just saw, that was lights, wipers, radio, even the genre of music was actually an entity. So those are the 2 ways that Watson understands my question, and I'll use that information to drive the dialogue, to drive the actual conversation and say, here's how you should respond, here's the information you should collect at any given time. So let's just build a really simple scenario to start. We'll just do one question all the way through those pieces of information. In this case, if a natural disaster is hitting, some people might say, look, I have to go, I need to call in. What's the phone number? So we can just make an intent for contact info, and we'll give it a description of users are asking how to call in. And I'll create that intent. Now, to train this, all we need to do is give Watson samples of ways that people actually ask this question. You don't have to be a data scientist. You don't have to really know anything about how a natural language classifier works. you just say, here are the ways my users are going to ask it, right? It's always relevant to how are your people, the people you're going to be interacting with, going to ask these questions. So it's important not to use how you would ask the question, right? You're the subject matter expert, you know the business, so you're going to ask it in different ways than customers or the people who are being hit by the disaster might do it. You might call it, this is a level 5 emergency, and they might just say, hey, there's a hurricane. So you need to make sure it's in the same way that they would ask it. So we can just make it up for now. How do I call you? I need help. Please, I need to talk to someone. What's your phone number? And I need to talk to you. So we usually say that 5 samples is kind of the bare minimum to start to build a class that's actually going to work decently. 20 to 30 samples is going to be a much stronger way to do it. In reality, it does depend on, what are your other intents that you have? How similar or different are they? Because I could have created an intent in that car scenario for turn on the radio and also turn on the lights, and a third intent for turn on the wipers. But you can see how similar those sentences are, which makes it really confusing for a computer like Watson to tell the difference. He only has one word to really get that they're different questions. So that's why we use the one intent across different entities. But if those questions were all phrased very differently, we would use multiple intents. So now that I've asked for contact info, in this case, there's really no entities that I need, right? If people are asking anything about how to reach me, I can just give a response. So I'm going to skip to the dialog for now. And we'll see that we are given a few what we call dialog nodes in a sort of a tree view. So the first one is the welcome message, right? This is just the first thing that someone sees when they would go to this app. Now, if they're on something like SMS through text message of like Twilio or Nexmo, then you may not have this, right? The user is actually sending the first message. So you want to be responding to what they say. They probably already know what questions they're there for. Maybe they got the number from a website or something. But on a website or an application where the user might see Watson first, it's always a good idea to give a greeting, hello, how can I help you? And more importantly, you really should try to give some notion of what you're here to do. I can give you information during a natural disaster. So this is really going to say, don't be asking me what restaurants are nearby. Don't be asking me, how deep is the ocean. I'm really here for a specific purpose, so try and stay on topic. And it really starts to build a lot of trust. That way, if they do ask something very different, they're not as put off when Watson doesn't answer it. He's not here for that. It also kind of gives them some guidance on, hey, here's the kind of things I should be asking, right? An even stronger welcome message might be some links to some questions they can ask or to information they can get. So it's a really helpful thing to give them as much information as possible about what they should be asking. But I'm here to tell you what we're going to ask, so we can leave it at that for now. The other dialog node that we give out of the box is called this anything else. So this is kind of your default response, right? What happens when the user says something that just doesn't match at all to any information that Watson was already taught? In this case, we're just going to say, I didn't understand. You can try rephrasing or some kind of general statements you've probably seen from chatbots or virtual agents before. Ideally, you would have a connection to a live agent in the background or a fallback to something like a web search, right? If you think about the way Siri does it, Siri's actually going to say, for send a text message or play some music, she'll just do that for you. Anything else, she does a web search. In this case, a web search isn't super helpful, right? You want to really keep them on topic with really deep domain knowledge. So you might have a manual of what to do in a disaster, or you could search the government's website about natural disasters. Or what we typically recommend is using the Watson Discovery service to ingest documentation and manuals and things like survival guides. That way, if a user asks a question, you can search this wealth of knowledge and just pull out the relevant sort of paragraph or topics that are related to the user's question and really get them that deep information with not a whole lot of training required. But in this case, we're just going to give this blanket response. And now we'll add some content in the middle. So first we've created, looks like some things have started bugging out. The first thing is we've created this new dialog node, and I'm just going to give it a name, right? We'll call it contact info. This way, if other people come and join my project or are working on this, they sort of know what this thing is here to do. And I'll give it an intent. So right now I only have one intent. And when I start typing hashtag, which is our shorthand for use this intent as the condition, contact info pops right up for me. I could also use an @ sign for entities, and I could use a $sign for any custom context that's been set. So maybe they are logged in or somehow I know who they are. I could use context to say if this person is an adult, give this information. If a child, give this other information. If they're authenticated, maybe they get more info than people who have not logged in. But in any case, I'll use just this one intent of contact info, and you can call us at 1-800 help me. Obviously, that's not a real phone number. It's not quite long enough. I don't actually have a number to call. Please don't call me for help in a natural disaster. I won't be the most effective. So we'll use a fake number for now. And this is really the very basics of building out your dialogue. How do I reach you? And I get that information back. So the further I get away from the training data I gave, I can always go in and relabel how Watson understood this question. Right? If I say something just like phone, he'll probably get it fairly right. He doesn't have a whole lot of other things to guess. So with only one option, it's either this or not. So he's probably not very confident. Let's say, I could say, yes, I definitely want Watson to use this as training data. I can even just click it again, and that intent will then be added back as training data to the contact info intent. Even though he got it right, I'm reinforcing that learning to say, yes, this actually was correct, Watson. Keep learning that. Keep getting better. And if he gets it wrong, I can always go and relabel it as well. So that's the very basic pieces of just a question and a response. And most virtual assistants are going to have a whole bunch of these kind of FAQ responses based on what people are most commonly asking and just trying to get that quick info, right? Maybe what's the website? So we can use entities actually to differentiate between a phone number and a website. So in this case, when someone asks for contact info, I'm actually going to have two different values under this name. So I'll have website, and I'll just give it some synonyms of URL, web address, site, any other ways that someone might say something like a website. In case I can't think of any more, I can actually ask Watson, hey, what else looks like this, right? So he'll give me some more information. Web page, home page, link, all these things make a lot of sense to add as values. So thanks, Watson, for reminding me of some of these that I might have missed. And I'll add that in. The other piece was the phone number. And call. So once again, just in case I miss any, right? Telephone, great suggestion. People probably don't really need the cell phone or landline. I can ignore those, and I'll add those as well. So you see, as I'm adding this data, Watson's actually training right there on the fly. Every time I add a new piece, Watson's going to retrain his models and say, okay, what's new here? What do I need to learn to make sure I'm taking in all this new information? Now, Watson typically trains very quickly. We usually see 10 seconds or so, depending on how much data there is. It does depend how much traffic we're getting and things kind of going on with the internet, which I know there's some latency going around right now. So we'll give Watson just a minute. But while we're waiting for that training to go through, we can actually prepare for that in our dialogue. So one option here is I can respond actually with both of these pieces of information in one dialog node. So I'm going to go to customize the node here, and you see this multiple responses. This is really saying there's one entry point and a few different ways to respond. So if they say contact info, and then the bot recognizes, once again, I'll use @ sign for entities. The hashtag is for intents. Oh, contact info is exactly what I was looking for. And now Watson's actually going to give me some suggestions of what people are normally doing, right? If I have a number, I could do greater than or less than. If I want to respond kind of at a default way, I could just say is not. In this case, I do want to respond specifically for phone numbers and websites. So if someone's asking for the website, I can just say go to, right? I don't know if this is a real website. I certainly hope it is. But something like this, And then for contact info is a phone number. I can say you can call us at 1-800-HELP. And now when I ask a question containing either of those specific pieces of information, how do I call your phone? And I get that specific piece of information back. How do I reach your website? And I get just the URL back. Now, someone is still, I need help or something more generic. In this case, you really would want something like an agent or a quick way for them to get help. This sounds pretty urgent. But you see, Watson actually didn't give a response because in this case, he is actually looking for the general contact info statement as well as the specific piece of information. So I'm actually going to give a third response here that just has the value of true. So in programming, when we are going through this information, right, we say, does the bot see contact info? Does this statement evaluate to true? Is this true or false? So in this case, we're going to say, hey, it's contact info and also true, right? There's no condition here. And I'll say something like, you can either call us at 1-800-HELP or go to our website. And we're going to kind of give that blanket response. So it's a little bit less precise, right? And depending how much information I want to give to someone, it can be too much for them to digest. If I had 15 different ways to contact, I might give this blanket response not containing all of the information, just 2 of the most common ones or something the way I want them to reach out. But we can see now if I say I need help, right, we get this kind of general response for the contact info. So that's how you do a multiple conditional response. Typically, it does use entities. Now, we do have another option here to use our entities like we were seeing in the car dashboard. In this case, I'm actually going to turn the multiple responses off again. And rather than saying where they should go, I'm actually going to ask them. Right? In this case, I need to kind of be sure it's not urgent. I'll actually ask them, do you want our phone number or our website? And I'm going to create what's called a child node. So child nodes really are part of what we call a dialog tree. This would be a parent, this would be a child, and just in case I do say it in the future, we consider these ones on the very far left, we say these are at root level, right? A tree comes out of the ground, at the bottom are roots. So it really is a family tree kind of metaphor. And in this case, once they say contact info, we give that response, and only then, Watson will kind of be sitting right here in between these, and he'll know, look at these nodes first. Okay, so look at these 2, and only look at them after this first one has been done. So if you really have a step-by-step process, or something that needs to really only follow the original question, you can use this parent-child relationship in order to accomplish that. So now I can just say contact info is website. And once again, I can give that URL. And for the other one, I can go back to the phone number. And now if we test this out again, we can say something like, I need help. And Watson's going to ask, which one do you want? Phone number. And we get the response that we are looking for. Once again, it will be smart to use that true node down here to say, if they don't say or they say something different, just give them this general info because we really need to get them help information quickly. You could also loop them back to try again if they don't get it right. There's a lot of logic you can start to implement to give whatever experience you want to drive here. But for this simple example, I just wanted to show this parent-child relationship. Something that we've recently added, though, is a way to interact with objects other than just text, right? Because you're on a computer or a mobile phone, it can be much faster to actually tap a button or view an image. So we're going to actually change the response type here to this option. In this case, we can give a title, which is going to be kind of the question we want to ask, right? How do you want to contact us? I don't need a description for this case. It's pretty straightforward. And I'm actually going to add 2 options. The first one is, what does the user see, right? What is the label here? I'm going to put phone number. And the value is used that way you can actually send something different to Watson than then the label actually shows. So you could say, I want to call your phone number. I want to call you, but we actually just want to send in the value phone number back to Watson. That's what he's actually looking for based on our dialogue. So we can show something different than actually we tell Watson. I want to see your website, and we can just send in website. So if we run through the same thing and I say I need help, we see that Watson now returns these clickable options to say, this can be a little bit easier for you, right? I don't want you to have to type in something. I don't want you to get it wrong. This is a much faster way to interact. So I say I want to call you. Watson, again, we sent in phone number, even though the user sort of pretended to say I want to call you, and we get the phone number that we told Watson to give out. So you can also, again, put images here, and especially in a natural disaster situation, a picture's worth 1,000 words, as they say. So rather than showing someone 1,000 words they have to read, show them a picture of how to do something, maybe a picture of a map of where to go, where the safe centers are, things like that. There's a lot of options here with these different multimodal responses. Now, the last interaction that I wanted to show is something actually called slots. So this is for collecting information. For example, if you wanted to order a pizza, right, you need to know the size of the pizza and the toppings. So a user could say, I want a large pizza, I want a pepperoni pizza, I want a large pepperoni pizza, or I just want a pizza. And Watson should be able to ask, what information do I still need without re-prompting for the things he already knows. So that's what the use case for what this dialog pattern called slots. But first, I'm going to add an intent for make an appointment, right? Let's say something's coming or something's happened. Maybe a family member has gone missing and you need to actually meet with a person to explain the situation. There's a lot of reasons that you might need to make an appointment during a natural disaster, but you're going to want to use the virtual assistant to actually schedule that, right? The assistant can schedule it for whenever it's available, and then you can go meet with a human when it makes sense, when kind of the resources allow. So user wants to book time with a person. We'll create that in intent, and we can start to add some examples again. I want to make an appointment. What are the most straightforward ways to ask this? Make a reservation, book time with you, set a meeting in person, and I want to meet. Right, you can see I try and use a few things that are kind of closely related to each other, but still different ways of saying things. I didn't want to say, I want to make a reservation, I want to make a meeting, I want to make a booking, right? I tried to use different forms of the sentence so Watson kind of gets varied data and can really get a better understanding of what might be asked. Now, we'll need entities for this as well. But in this case, I'm actually just going to use what we call system entities. So these are some pre-built things that we already have from the service side to make your job a little easier. So I'm going to use the system entity for date, which means they can say a day of the week, or even a kind of March 5th, or 01, 02, 2018. You can really say it in a few different formats, and Watson will grab it and normalize it. And then I'm also going to use the entity for sys_time, right? What time do we want this meeting to be at? Those are the only two I'm going to use for this example. You could see how valuable something like number, maybe for booking a reservation at a restaurant, the number of people that are coming is actually important. So you might do that as well. We can show a demo with that today, show some extra slots. Location, right? If there's multiple centers to meet at, you could use that. Granted, the system location entity will just grab any location that the user says. So you might only have specific centers you can meet at. You might want to design your own entity for the location if you have kind of specific requirements or validations that need to be done, right? If there's a natural disaster in San Jose, California, and they say, I want to meet in Florida, obviously that doesn't work. Other way around wouldn't work either. So the sys location, it will just capture when they say a location. You'll need to validate that on your own, again, or create your own entity. So I'm going to create another one. We're going to call this reservations. And once again, I'm going to customize it. Maybe you saw this before, but I'm actually going to turn on this slots information, right? We're going to enable the system to gather information. And if the user doesn't say anything, yeah, I want to give kind of a blanket message that just says, hey, here's everything I need. Tell me in any order or all of it. So the first thing we need, right, it's going to show us which ones we've turned on. You saw all those other ones there, but because we haven't turned them on, Watson has not been trained on them yet for this specific workspace. It's only going to show the ones that we're actually using. So first we need the system number, and Watson's automatically going to say, hey, I think I would remember this as the number, right? You can change the name of this context variable if you want to. And if the user doesn't give it, we'll say how many people are coming, right? What question should Watson ask if the user doesn't say this? Once again, we'll use for time this time. Watson's going to say, look, I think I should say this as time. What time did you want to meet? Looks like we're having some connectivity issues. We'll have to make sure that's saved. Lastly, we are going to do system date, save it as date, and what day did you want to come in? Okay, and if no slots are pre-filled, right, the user asks the question, oops, we have to add the initial intent that someone might say, I want to make an appointment. If someone says, I want to make an appointment, and no slots are pre-filled, right, none of those context variables are saved, what should Watson ask? I need to know what date, time, and how many people are coming. Let me know. So this is the sentence Watson will say if he has no information at all. And finally, once all this information is collected, what do we say? Right? Great. I have an appointment for however many people you brought in, right? I said before the $sign is for a context variable, and you saw above, Watson was going to save this information as a context variable like this. For the number of people at time on date. So this way, whatever the user says, right, whatever information they gave, Watson's going to remember that and display it back to them at the end. Now, you might want to build in something like, is this correct? Or do you want to change any information? But for this, we're just going to confirm what they said. So now that we've told Watson what information he needs, how to collect it, and how to respond when we're all done, we can go ahead and test. So we'll start with the simplest case of, I want to make a reservation. In this case, hopefully Watson's going to give a question of all the information we need, and I'll say it's for 2 people, in which case he says, great, I see the system number. This sentence is really meaningless to me from an intent point of view, but we're really only looking for entities at this stage anyways. What day did you want to come in? I'll say Monday. And he says, okay, great, here's the date for next Monday, so I can actually send that to my calendar system. And he didn't get a time, but he said, that's good enough for me, it looks like. So we'll have to go back and debug, why aren't you asking for the time? I would guess it's because we saw that error message. So let's just refresh the screen and see what was actually trained. So what happened was the prompt was never actually set. And the way that it works is if you don't set a prompt, Watson takes this slot as optional. So in that case, if the user were to say, I want a meeting at 5 p.m., then Watson would capture that and take that into consideration. But since we didn't say it, maybe we're assuming, they'll come in whenever works on that day. But I do want to make sure we collect, a time for this. So what time did you want to arrive? And now that we've saved it and, we don't get any error messages, we can go ahead and try it again. We'll skip through a few of the information. I want to book an appointment on Monday. And in this case, right, we'll see, look, Watson knew we wanted to make an appointment, and he already got a date. So some information is pre-filled, so he's actually not going to ask this. He's just going to jump straight into the information collecting. Now, the first piece of information he needs is that number. We'll say it's for 3 people. And he'll say, okay, great. What time do you want to come in? I'll say 5 p.m. And we're done. So notice that even though the date is actually the 3rd slot that Watson needs to fill, he already got it from that first message. So why would he ask again? We already know this. So we're done here, and he has that appointment. And maybe the user's used this system before, so we can actually come through and say something like, I want to book an appointment for 2 on Monday at 6 p.m. In which case he's going to get all 3 of those entities. He knows we want to book an appointment. He says, great, here's all the information you need. And we're really done here. So those are really the 2 or 3 kind of main types of interactions, right? We saw originally we had just the one question, one answer type of interaction. You can still see that kind of with the anything else node, right? Nothing matches, so just say this, and that's it. We would typically call it like an FAQ scenario. Then we saw the multiple conditional responses, right? This is where we had the contact info, and we already had phone number and website right there in line for the user just to ask. Once again, that's still pretty much an FAQ scenario, but you're covering more information with still only one dialog node. Then we kind of have this process flow is what we would usually call it, where there's a first step and then a second and steps beyond that. And you can continue to, child nodes can have child nodes, and those child nodes can have more child nodes. So you could really go through a multi-step process of whatever complicated thing, right? Maybe applying for a mortgage, right, is a really complicated process. You'll use some mixes of slots to collect a few pieces of information, and then a process to say, here's where we're at. I need you to agree to this disclaimer, anything like that. Or maybe, if someone is preparing for a disaster, right, how should I prepare? You might want to ask, do you live in a home or an apartment? Do you have a basement? You might need to collect some information using slots first, and then you might have, a 10-step process of here's how you should guard your windows. Here are the things that you should do for your doors. Here's kind of the storage and food that you should have prepared in case you can't leave the house for a few days. You can use combinations of these different settings and node types to really make sure you can accomplish any interaction that you would want to do for your users. Now, one other big piece of information here is a new feature that we're calling digressions. So in a lot of cases, you've designed this process flow to suit your needs, right? This is the way that you want users to interact with the system, but it's not always the way that they interact with it. So what happens if during a process, a user were to ask a different piece of information, right? I'm just going to use the content we've already created, but there's definitely going to be more useful ways to use this. So the first thing I'm going to do is go back to those node settings. And maybe you saw it before, but next to customizing the way my node looks and the type of dialog node that it is, there was another setting called digressions. So first we can click the little information button to see what this actually does. Right, digressions allows a user, while in a process, to ask a different question. They can jump out of that process, get their answer, right? The last thing you want to do is have someone ask a question and ignore them. However, what most dialogue systems will do, they may know a different question was asked, but then they're abandoning that first process, right? If they're trying to book an appointment and it's really important for me to meet with them, I don't want them to lose that. Or if I'm in a sales scenario, right? I have a chatbot that helps order pizza. That pizza order is the most valuable thing to my business. That's what keeps us alive. So if they were to ask a different question, I don't want them to abandon that process unless they're really trying to. So we've enabled digressions to let someone jump out to a different piece of information and actually dynamically return back to where they were. So it's a really powerful feature for letting the user drive the conversation without missing out on the way it was designed to go. So in this case, the default setting is that you cannot digress away, right? You have to fill all of these slots before you can finish. It's not really a great situation for the end user. If it's a really high value process, I may need to do that, right? Or let's say it was, truly an emergency, right? Someone's injured. You don't want them asking about the website or the phone number. You want to get them help as soon as possible. So you might not want to allow digressing away during those types of situations. When I'm just booking an appointment, it's no problem, right? Ask away, ask whatever else you want. So yes, you can go away from here. Now, again, if this is a really high value business process, I could say only go find other dialog nodes that come back. In this case, you might have something for quit, or they do want to get out of this process. So I typically don't turn this on, but there can be some really high value cases where it's important never to forget about this process. And then, so this first half of the settings are for what happens while this node is in progress. Can I go away or not? Now, the second setting is when I'm doing something else. Should I be able to come to this node or not? And if I do come to it, do I return? Yes, I have no problem going back after booking a reservation. Now, I could create a dialog node for something like quit, in which case I would not want to return. And I'll actually show that in just a second. So we've now allowed them to leave this process while in the middle of it, but where are they actually going to go? So I need to make sure that my other dialog nodes are set up as well to receive that new piece of information. So in this case, digressions can come, right? Yes, always be looking. And if you do actually digress away to this node, yeah, I want you to go back, right? There's no problem going back to what you're doing after giving contact info. And like I said, I'm going to create one more dialog node for quit. And I haven't actually created intent for this yet, so I can create it right from this screen. And I'll say, okay, we can stop that now. Right, so whatever they're trying to quit, I can give that info. So I've created an intent label. However, there's no actual data in it. I'll just give it 3 really basic ways to say this. We don't need a whole lot of data for just for this sample. And I'm going to make sure that the digression settings are set up appropriately. So in this case, there is no digressing away, right? If someone were to say quit, you give that response, you're done, right? You're back at the root level. So there really is no digression because you're never in the middle of anything. So we've actually changed the settings, so there's no point in setting that up, right? Now, digressions can come into this node though, right? If you're somewhere else, this node should be available. And because they're specifically telling me, hey, I want to quit, I don't want to go back to where I was, right? They're literally telling me, don't go back. So we're not going to return after a digression here. We're going to quit the current process, regardless of what it was. And right on time, Watson's finished training, so I can now test exactly what we have just built. So I could say something like, I want to book an appointment. I need to know some information, right? Maybe I'm fed up. I don't want to deal with this right now, or maybe I need some more information, right? What's the location? What's the website? So I know, do I actually want to book this, right? I can just say, what is the contact info? Oh, irrelevant. So we need a little more training, right? This was a little bit too far away from just those few samples that I gave Watson when I was training the contact information. So I can just add it right in. And once again, Watson will learn that very quickly. We'll start over. We'll say, I want to book an appointment. And we'll make sure to use something more relevant. How do I call you? I know that was one of the things we nearly trained on at least. Again, Watson's only going to follow the process. So I did give the information for phone number, which is why we did that multiple conditional response node first, right? We don't want to ask if the user's already told Watson. But in this case, we've actually told Watson, hey, you need to ask. So we say, I want to call you. We get the phone number, right? So now I can call in if I need to, or I could have said the website. And then we digress back to where we were, right? I need to know what date, time, and how many people are coming. Let me know. So we'll say 3 people. And we go back into filling slots, right? We've seen this happen before. Maybe I've given too much info. I'm already calling in, and I got the help that I needed. So rather than finishing this, I could just say, hey, I want to quit. Watson says, great, we can stop that now. Notice we did not digress back to where we were. So it's a really powerful way to use digressions to make sure your users can actually drive the conversation, navigate to the things that they want to, while still getting through the process as you've designed it. Again, you can set those digression settings to be, however flexible or unflexible you want to make them go through it, or let them drive it as much as possible. The only other setting that I really need to show today is what we call a folder. So we have these FAQ dialog nodes, and we're going to actually add a folder right below. The reservation is kind of a special case, so maybe I don't want to put it in the folder. And then I'm going to move this node into the folder. Right? It was really going to help me organize my content. We'll just call the folder FAQ. And it's going to help me keep things a little bit cleaner. That way, if I have a whole bunch of information I'm able to give my users, I don't want to see 10,000 dialog nodes at this root level. I can use a folder system to really make sure I stay organized. Maybe I can assign folders to different people on my team. I can group it by the type of content. So when I need to find something, I can do it very quickly. And it's all very easy for me to navigate. Additionally, you can actually add a condition onto a folder, right? So I've seen some people using tensor entities here. It's a very specific case. Typically, I'll see people using context variables. And the most common use case is if someone is authenticated, right? They've logged into the app. That means we know who they are. They're definitely a customer. They deserve that. They have access to a bit more information than someone we don't know who may just be visiting the website. So I see a lot of our customers using folders to actually restrict what content can be showed or can't be showed to certain users. In this case, we don't really need any conditions. We can leave it blank so everyone can see everything, right? We have no problem with that. Just a few other things to mention before I conclude the demo. We do have what's called this content catalog. So it has a handful of different industry-related content as well as some general or just some customer care things like what's your address or contact info. So it's a great way to get started if you don't know how people might ask these questions. If you have no data to go off of at first, you can just pull in some of this data as your intents and then build your own dialogue information, right? We don't know your phone number or your address. So we just want to give you the ways people do ask the question, and then you can go in and fill in the information yourself. So it's a great way to get started. A few other things to mention is we do have what's called this Improve tab. So as you're getting live data, this is the best way to learn, right? I think we've all had a job before, and you go through training in the first couple of weeks, and you learn what you learn, and it can be helpful to get started, but you learn so much more when you finally actually start doing the job, interacting with customers and seeing what they ask. You see where you might have missed some things at first in that training. So this tab will show the conversations that actually happened, how many are happening, how much traffic is your bot getting, as well as some of the more important pieces of data, right? How many active users do you have? What's the average conversations per user, the top intents and the top entities, right? So the top intents and top entities are really important so you know where to focus. For example, we gave a very, sparse pieces of information about how to contact us, just a phone number and a website. That was it. But you might want to, if you see a lot of people are asking how to contact you, you might learn, maybe your website isn't organized all that great to give that info, or the fact that, maybe they really want to know more about what they can do when contacting you. You really want to focus on the things people are asking about. So these are just some higher level metrics. The next part here is what's called user conversations. So my bot isn't hooked up to any applications or front ends, so there's no data, but the actual conversations that my users are having would show up here. We don't put the tryout panel in this view because I typed it in, right? I tried it out. I don't really need to see it again. But any live conversations with an actual customer or end user coming from an application would show up here. And I can then go, and you'll see the same view, right? You can see those intents. You can label new entities. You can go to the dialog node to fix any responses you want and really make improvements based on actual interactions. Another thing that I didn't quite cover today is what we call a call out. So that's where you can use Ibm Cloud Functions in order to go call some kind of external service. This may be to get weather predictions, especially in the case of a natural disaster. It seems very important to actually book that reservation, right? Once the reservation is done, I'll send it to some backend system so my employees or whoever they're meeting with actually gets notified. So Ibm Cloud Functions is a serverless hosting environment where you can just store some code, right? So I've created some code to call the Watson Discovery service. And what basically happens is when my dialog node gets hit with this action, it's going to go run all this code. We haven't built this into the dialog node, right? It's a very small screen. Cloud Functions is a much better coding environment to really make sure you can check for errors and all those kind of things that you need from kind of a tool like this. And then it'll just send the response back to dialog. So it has a new context variable, right? In this case, it would be the results from discovery. To show this in action, I do have another sample. Once again, Watson is our co-pilot. And I can say the same things as before, turn on the lights. But I've also trained the Watson Discovery service on a Ford owner's manual that we got online. And I can say something like, how do I check my tire pressure? Now, I can't possibly build all of these types of questions into the dialogue. So this is how I can very easily capture a lot of information using the Watson Discovery service. And when I ask this, right, I get these results that came straight out of the owner's manual. But the value here is I didn't have to open up this 500-page owner manual and find the right section. Watson just says, hey, look, here's the best stuff for you. So it's really easy to cover a lot more ground. And this callouts feature can be used across a number of different scenarios. And this is all outlined in our documentation. So I'm happy to walk through that at another time. That really concludes my demo. We have a wealth of documentation on IBM Cloud. We have the API references. We have SDKs for various coding languages. Lots of ways to make this easy to consume and use once you've done the training. So I definitely look forward to seeing what everyone builds with Watson. And yeah, thank you for viewing.